And welcome on in to the Third Reverse Fantasy Football Podcast. Brett Malmuth here with you, along with Zach Malmuth. Zach, how are you?
I'm doing all right, Brett. It's end of March now, so getting closer and closer to one of my favorite times of year, the NFL draft. Can't wait for it. We're at the end of the stretch of free agency, and I'm looking forward to the draft.
Yeah, hit the little combine a couple weeks ago. Now it seems like all the pro days are wrapping up onto their tail end, and we're going to head right into that stretch where teams are inviting guys and the prospects into their facilities, getting to know these guys more and more, and then obviously start building out their draft boards around now, a month out from the draft, and we'll be all over it. And starting next week, we're going to be doing a lot of previews, going position by position this way that we've been doing these free agency recaps. It's going to be a similar formula here the next couple of weeks as we've done here. But for now, please subscribe to us on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. Give us a thumbs up. Go check out some of our other episodes that we've done where, yes, we did recap the quarterback position, then the running back position. This week, Zach, we're going to recap the pass catchers, so the tight ends and the wide receivers, where everybody signed, where everybody got traded, because there were quite a few trades in this window here, which wasn't totally expected, but some names were on the move. So let's just jump right into it, as really the only real news I would say that happened in the NFL is the kickoff rule got put into place earlier today. They also pushed the trade deadline back a week, which should help from the fantasy perspective, give you another week to see where guys actually land as opposed to where your deadline is. But just let's briefly talk kickoff rule here just for a second. Zach, I don't know that this really totally affects the fantasy game. It should make it kind of interesting as far as the XFL rule they adopted and allowing for a target zone and such. I think what it's going to result in is actually more kickoffs returned for touchdowns, because I think that lining up guys 5 yards apart from each other down the field is going to allow them to open up some holes quickly. I mean, back when you had the guys of like Reggie Bush, who were consistent fantasy performers, were also the kick returner, I think you would have saw more of a fantasy impact there, getting an extra 6 points for kickoff return touchdowns. We don't really see that in today's NFL, where the regular guys aren't exactly returning. The guys who are returning a lot of the times are either defenders, backup, or fifth string, sixth string wide receivers, things like that, or just playing on specialists, as they're called.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing about it is it'll lead to a few less injuries. Excuse me, Brett. I think that's the biggest thing. Keeping those players safe. It's very dangerous in that situation on a kickoff. And I think there's plenty of kickoffs that you see when once a guy gets tackled, it always happened that somebody's on the ground injured. Like whether they're being blocked or whether it's the physical player who's returning the ball. And it's not a great look for the NFL to really always have that. So I think it'll lead to less injuries, which is huge, number one. And I agree with you. I think it'll lead to more fun on a kickoff return, maybe for touchdowns. I think that's the big things that really stand out to me. Looking at player safety, of course, is number one. And I think they really did that with this rule. Plus, like you said, they're giving a better opportunity, better odds for somebody to run one back by implementing this rule. I think it's a really good one, Brett.
Yeah, it's just going to be kind of fun watching that XFL style, because if you've never seen it, it is certainly a change of what the norm is. And so, guys lining up down the field 5 yards apart, kickoff comes from where it normally does. Not as much room for the returner. If it goes and it lands straight in the end zone, it's a touchback. If it lands target zone and goes in, the touchback goes back even further. So I believe it's the 30-yard line and the 20-yard line is what they adopted, which is kind of interesting. At first, there was the talk of a 35-yard line that got changed to the 30. So, yeah, it'll be kind of interesting. guys can't move until the ball is touched by the returner. So yeah, I just think there's going to be some big runs because holes are going to be opened up at the 30-yard line or whatnot on their own side of the field, 70 yards down the field. I see that sort of coming where there's going to be more strategy as far as the returning team and actually taking the ball out as opposed to just taking the touchback.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. And part of the rule is like there's a lot of stuff that kind of also stays the same on kickoffs. There's obviously if the ball goes out of bounds, it's at the 40. Like they're keeping a lot of the same stuff from the rule, but just obviously changing it to where you're moving upfield if you're the kickoff team and you're in a certain spot if you're the return team. So like I said, definitely a smart rule by the NFL, and I'm excited to see what happens with it.
Yeah, it should be pretty fun. And, just another caveat that they added in was the rule about the onside kick, where you have to sort of declare that you're going to go for an onside kick, and otherwise you line up the other way, obviously. But that should be very interesting. But, yeah, just wanted to get that in there because that was the news of the NFL week this past week. Let's jump into some player news here, and we're going to start now out in Tampa Bay as we break down our first guy here. It's Mike Evans. He is returning on a 2-year, $41 million contract extension with the Buccaneers. Zach, we briefly talked about it just a few weeks ago when we talked to Baker Mayfield. Listen, Mike Evans ended up leading to Baker Mayfield coming back and re-upping with the Bucs. I think that this is sort of status quo from where it was last year. They don't add anybody on offense. They kind of just brought everybody back. Where do you see this Mike Evans thing to? And do you see an increase or a decrease in value at all?
No. I think he's probably in the best shape right now of where he's been, just because he's coming off a couple seasons. I don't think injuries have really been a problem for him recently. We saw it maybe a couple years ago where just a couple injuries pop up and he's out for a little while. I think injuries have kind of tailed off just a bit for a guy like Mike Evans. I remember even a couple of years ago, it was maybe a guy to be just a tiny bit shaky on when you're drafting, just because of maybe the injuries were going to pop up. But he's been at full strength, full go these last couple seasons. And now, obviously, last season with Baker, it kind of brought him to a new level. I think he definitely got the bulk of the touches in that offense compared to a guy like Chris Godwin, who, yeah, it was just more on and off if he was going to get touches or not, especially in fantasy. Evans was clearly the number one in Tampa. So I think looking at this year, I think they're ready to go once again. I think they saw the chemistry that was built with Baker in this offense between Rachaad White and Mike Evans and even Chris Godwin, even though it wasn't the greatest year. I think they know the capabilities that Baker can have in this offense. And now you bring back Mike Evans, who you've had there forever. It's going to be a really, really good match. I think looking at Evans' fantasy value, I believe he's getting up there in age, Brett.
He's going to be 31 by the start of next year.
So it's kind of right now you're standing pat on a guy like Mike Evans. Obviously, he gets this brand new deal. It's something to start just slightly thinking about for the future. Obviously, he's got this new deal, so it's okay. Yeah, he's in a good spot right now. But as the age starts to get up there, you're gonna maybe start to have to think about it. Maybe moving him or just thinking for the future on a guy like Mike Evans. But I think this year he's one guy to go get, because I think the chemistry he built with Baker last year sets him on another level than it has been in the past.
Yeah, I think Mike Evans sort of falls into the category of, if you're a contender, you want him on your team. If you're a rebuilder, I think I would keep him at least for part of the year, because he's going to get going. He is the number one target. His value is what it is. We are in the midst of the offseason, so wouldn't exactly go out and just trade him right now. probably around the rookie draft, yeah, go out, look and see what there is. He's probably worth a late first round pick if I had this right now, or thereabouts. And there's, a chance that there's a team who's right on the bubble heading into next year, on the bubble getting the playoffs. You could flip them to that guy for a first round pick. That team might not make the playoffs. You don't know. And so you can end up with a mid to high pick in your draft next year as far as 2025 goes. Yeah, I think I would just hold on to him for right now. I don't know that I'm really thrilled with what's going to be at the back end of the first round. A lot of unknown just as far as it goes. Superflex, aside, I'm not sure about the end of the draft. As far as Superflex goes, yeah, a lot of talent's going to slip because there's a lot of quarterbacks that are out there. But yeah, I think that if I was a rebuilder right now and I had Mike Evans, I'd keep him till around trade deadline and see what was out there. But yeah, float him out there. If you're thinking about trading him, at least float the idea out there to some of the other teams.
Yeah, great. And the 2-year deal he got tells you really all you need to know there. Yeah. It's kind of, okay, this year you maybe sit on it, or you look for a trade by the deadline, or then you just hold on to him and trade him before the start of next season kind of deal. Because you got to plan at some point with that 2-year deal that it's going to be one of his last big ones because of the age. He's a guy that, as long as health is not a problem, he could stay an extra couple years, but I don't think we're getting peak Mike Evans in those next couple years after that. So I'd look to trade him, especially if you're not a contender. I'd look to trade him at the end of this year or into next year.
No, certainly. All right, jumping into our next guy, it's Michael Pittman Jr., who also nixed on free agency. He signs a 3-year extension getting tagged by the Colts, $70 million, Zach. So quite a bit of change there. I think that this, yes, obviously affects Michael Pittman Jr., but I really think that more than anybody, this affects Anthony Richardson. I think that had they lost Michael Pittman Jr. free agency, you're talking about Josh Downs, Alec Pierce, or the guys behind there. I think they would have been forced to pick a wide receiver in the draft. And plain and simple, they don't have to do that right now. Yeah, it'd be really nice if they can get a guy like that, even like a tight end like Brock Bowers. That would be kind of cool. But yeah, I really think that this helps Anthony Richardson more than anybody else. 3-year deal, like he's going to stick around and he's not going anywhere. Allows Josh Downs to develop as well. So I think that yes, it does help Michael Pittman and Michael Pittman owners. It really does help Josh Downs. It does help Anthony Richardson. It also really helps Jonathan Taylor because you know that there is a threat that they can throw the ball. They're not just going to run it every single time with Richardson or Taylor.
Yeah, I think this deal was so crucial for Indy. It obviously their top weapon, their guy on offense who he takes them to a complete different level than they would have if they were without him. Obviously they have Taylor in the backfield, but in the passing game, it's a lot of guys are young, so they're still learning. And I think a guy like Pittman, who's experienced already, has done a lot so far in his NFL career, getting him back is absolutely huge, especially now with the young quarterback in Richardson coming back from injury and still getting settled in an NFL offense. I think this was a huge slam dunk for Indianapolis to bring him back. And I think his fantasy value is at an all-time high right now. I think he's just in a great spot. I'd hold on to him. He's a guy for the future. He proved his talent last year. He had a remarkable season. So I think he's a guy to really keep an eye on for the future. I think he's one of the best in terms of future wide receivers in the NFL. He's got to be near the top of that list, Brett.
Yeah, we got to own it because we weren't that high on him heading into last season, but he did. He proved us wrong. He's 26. Well, go ahead.
I was going to say, well, in our defense, we did say that was because of Anthony Richardson. We said, okay, it's because of Anthony Richardson, we're not high on Michael Pittman. if I knew that Minshew Mania was going to town here and just slinging the ball around, be a little bit higher on a guy like Michael Pittman.
Yeah, clearly. He's 26. You're not getting rid of him. Obviously, you're keeping him. You're building around that. I like to talk how you build around those wide receiver cores, and this is one of those guys that would fit in on there. Yeah, he's not an absolute superstar, but I think the first thing that really comes to mind is high floor. When I think of Michael Pittman, like he just has a really, really high floor. You know, you're going to get points every single week. I think that there's the potential that this year he takes another further step, especially as he starts to get that partnership going with Anthony Richardson. Hopefully Richardson can stick healthy for the bulk of the year, and they can start to do that.
Yeah, 100%.
All right, so jumping to our next one here, and Zach, it was a pretty big deal when Calvin Ridley was coming down to the wire, and it seemed like it was going to be Jacksonville or New England, back and forth they went. We heard all the rumblings about how Calvin Ridley was just waiting for the 4:00 window to hit because of the trade that they had previously made, the Jacksonville Jaguars with the Falcons. Falcons would have had to give up a second-round pick Falcons would have got a second-round pick had he signed with the Jacksonville Jaguars before 4 p.m. It would to a third-round pick if he had signed afterwards. That window goes, and suddenly Calvin Ridley heads to Tennessee to join the Titans in what had to be one of the biggest twists of this entire free agent frenzy. 4 years, $92 million. He had almost $50 million guaranteed at signing. Zach, this is just a big deal.
Yeah, I love this, Brent. I am a Ridley owner, so it makes it extra sweet for me. I'm obsessed with this offense. I really am. I think this Tennessee offense is at a new level now. They added a bunch of players. They added Tony Pollard. They added Calvin Ridley. And they brought back Tajay Spears. They brought back DeAndre Hopkins. And, I mean, they got a quarterback in Will Levis who not many people gave a chance. Not many people were high on him out of college. And he came in towards the end of last year, and he looked fantastic. He really did. There was on and offs. As an NFL quarterback, he looked really, really good. And I think he's only going to get better in an offense now. It's going to be probably the Bengals type offense, and they're just going to translate it to Tennessee. So it's a really, really great situation. Ridley, I mean, he got his money. He's a very talented wide receiver, and I think it was a little off sometimes in Jacksonville last year. That's a team that also loves to focus on their running back in ETN and then spread out to their weapons. I feel like Lawrence is still learning and getting to that peak level. A guy like Levis, yeah, it's going to take a little bit of time for that, but there are so many weapons in this offense that it kind of just makes it easy on a quarterback in Will Levis. Just give it to the open guy. I mean, you got three guys now, especially Pollard, Ridley, and Hopkins, who should make the most of their opportunities. They could do anything when they have the ball in their hands. So that's huge. And obviously bringing back some guys in Burks and Spears, I think it's just a great spot right now for Ridley to land.
Yeah, I think that, listen, when we talked about Ridley last year and heading into the offseason, it was sort of a disappointment as far as the season went because we really saw, the hype, and the hype was building about him being a solid, wide receiver one, and, he'd be able to get to that level. He never really got there. He became, a low-end wide receiver two. He hit a couple games there where we were okay, mid-tier wide receiver two. I think that this move really allows him to get to that potential of being wide receiver one. Yes, obviously you have DeAndre Hopkins next to him, but behind them, they got Westbrook-Ikhine, they got Treylon Burks. Listen, Treylon Burks stock down dramatically. I think that, as far as his value goes, it's pretty much cratered on this signing where, he sort of got his last chance, wasn't targeted in the last couple of weeks of the season. So yeah, stock down, way down on Treylon Burks. But as far as Ridley goes, I like the opportunity for stock up Will Levis. I think that this is an opportunity for him now where he's got two guys who really can just drive down the field really, really quickly and get open in D-Hop and in Ridley, and obviously can both catch in traffic. And so I think that for Will Levis, who's a guy who a borderline super flex play, I think he becomes a solid super flex play at least this year, with the potential that he can start maybe getting into that. I don't know exactly how this offense is going to run, but you could be sure that he'll be at least a solid super flex option in pretty much every league.
Yeah, definitely, bro.
All right, so another big trade here happened, and this time it happened at the wide receiver position. Keenan Allen, he gets traded to the Chicago Bears. Zach, this was pretty shocking, actually, that it was the Bears. But at the same time, when you factor in the money that was available around the league, really, as far as cap space goes, the Bears were a good fit. They had a lot of money available, had a ton of cap space. Really, now it just comes down to, they're going to put Caleb Williams in. We talked about that last week and showing up. Keenan Allen showed up at his pro day. And I just think that the Keenan Allen effect, I'm unsure of it. I just am. I think that DJ Moore has proven himself as the target. I think that, yes, obviously Keenan Allen, still Keenan Allen. He's going to get the ball. They bring in DeAndre Swift with Khalil Herbert, with Roschon Johnson. We spoke about that a couple weeks ago. There's just a lot of weapons here. So I'm not sure exactly where the fantasy value is going to come in. You would think that DJ Moore and Keenan Allen are going to get the bulk of it. We'll talk Gerald Everett in a little bit. They bring him in as well, join Cole Kmet. I just think there's a lot of guys here, a lot of mouths to feed for a rookie quarterback. And so I'm tempering my expectations as far as Keenan Allen. Yes, the name Keenan Allen, the football player, great acquisition for the Chicago Bears. I just think that DJ Moore is going to end up being the number one guy. And so I'm not sure how much that lowers Keenan Allen's value, just because he was the number one guy last year over in Los Angeles, and the last few years, Mike Evans being the number two guy. So now he's sort of in a role where he's the number two guy. I'm not sure if there's a ceiling there for him in Chicago.
Agreed, Brad. And I think a guy like Keenan Allen, the cliff might be coming soon on his career. I mean, he's dealt with a lot of injuries just over the last stretch. And I think looking at it, I'm kind of with you. I'm a little iffy on it because when I saw this trade, it kind of caught me by surprise. Keenan Allen's a fantastic player, not taking anything away from what Keenan Allen's done and what Keenan Allen can do in a really good offense. But they are giving him so many weapons. This is Caleb Williams. They're giving him so many weapons that I feel like it's just, I don't know if it's going to gel right away like people are expecting and maybe the Bears are expecting. It's going to take time. He's still, yes, he was great in college. He's not going to just float into the NFL and be a perfect NFL quarterback. He's still got a lot of things to learn. And I think if they got Keenan Allen in his second year, Caleb Williams, maybe his third year, a guy like that, to really just take them to another level, I would completely get it. Right now, I think the Bears offense is just going to be, it's the Bears offense. Because he's still going to be learning, and I still think it's going to take a tiny bit of time for Caleb to really sink into the NFL and get going. I like it from the standpoint that you get a lot of weapons now. For fantasy, not a fan of it because it's just they're gonna eat into each other, him and DJ Moore, and I think I don't know the peak level that really either one of them is going to get because they're both there. I think DJ Moore will be the one. It's just a worrying situation right now for me in Chicago, just because I don't know where Caleb's going to be at coming into the NFL just yet. I think it'll take, like I said, I think it takes time for him to really get settled.
Yeah, if I had to equate it to a situation, and it's a little bit of a different situation, but I would say it's almost at the same sort of value that like Cooper Kupp had, because Kupp was the number one guy. He got hurt. All of a sudden, Puka Nacua comes in, lights it up. By the time Cooper Kupp came back, he was the number 2 guy. There was absolutely a cap of a ceiling on Cooper Kupp's value, and we're starting to see the decline of what that looks like. And we saw that last year. I think that it's going to be a similar sort of thing here with Keenan Allen, where the cliff starts to come, and then you add the rookie quarterback part in. Like, yeah, I'm tempering my expectations here. Great football move, great NFL move. They'll win some more games from it. But yeah, as far as the fantasy value goes, yeah, I'm holding my expectations here on Keenan Allen. I'm not jumping off a cliff because I don't know that you're going to just go out and trade him for a second-round pick right now. Like, I'm going to see it get out and keep him on your team for right now. Maybe you use him as part of a deal if you're trying to upgrade something like that. But yeah, I wouldn't just trade him away.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's just kind of an iffy situation. I'd hold on to him, especially with a new quarterback coming in. You never know if he's going to boom with him. So we'll see.
Yeah, so shock effect coming off of Chicago. Keenan Allen gets traded to the Bears. So who's on the way out? That's Darnell Mooney. He signs with the Atlanta Falcons. Zach, this was a pretty good move. I liked it. It was 3 years, $39 million. 26 of it was guaranteed right at signing, so there is a way for them to get out of it if it doesn't work out. Darnell Mooney, 26 years old. It actually gives the Atlanta Falcons, I think, an opportunity to create some weapons around Drake London. They made a pair of moves, and we'll talk about the next one right after that. But sort of a nice little receiver core here now. And it doesn't lead everybody to be like, okay, well, then Drake London has to take a step forward because Kirk Cousins is there. This allows, Darnell Mooney's a guy who gets down the field very quickly, like we were talking about with the Tennessee guys. He'll be able to create some space for Drake London. And that's what I think is really important here. It's not about Darnell Mooney, the fantasy player, because he's been very hit or miss. I think that this is going to be sort of, like how it was almost in Minnesota, where he has his couple guys and yeah, we didn't see Jordan Addison score 1 million points every week, but he was solid. He had a couple solid things. He caught a couple bombs, and I think that that's sort of what we're going to see out of Darnell Mooney here, or Kirk Cousins.
See, I kind of think yes, the same on that, but I also think this had to come for Darnell Mooney, who he was pretty talented coming out a couple of years ago in the draft, a guy that a lot of people were high on. And it just, I think dynasty owners of Darnell Mooney were probably having a party that he got out of Chicago. He needed to get out of Chicago. That was the biggest thing for a guy like Darnell Mooney, because I think he went there and people had those expectations and they completely dropped with just how hit or miss the Bears offense was forever. And I think a guy like Darnell Mooney was one of the biggest that was really hurt by that. I think there was a couple more guys. A lot of them went down with injuries and season ending and career ending, like just a ton of wide receivers that went to Chicago and absolutely were terrible after that. A guy like Darnell Mooney has the talent. He just needs to be in the right situation. And it definitely wasn't in Chicago. Now he goes to an offense where there's a lot of weapons. There's a lot of things going on. And Kirk Cousins is a quarterback that could get him the ball. That's the big thing. So because of that, I'd be somewhat excited about a guy like Darnell Mooney, because I think he's been waiting to kind of burst out and boom in an offense in the NFL. And he just has not got the chance because he's just been in Chicago. So looking at it, I really, really like this move. I really like the pairing between him and Kirk Cousins. And I think it could bring his fantasy value back up to a really solid spot, Brett.
Yeah, and so let's just bring the other part of the moves here. They go out and they get Rondell Moore in trade. And so now, again, a nice little core that they have, London, Mooney, and Moore. They obviously have Bijan. They obviously have Kyle Pitts, Tyler Algier as well. And they obviously signed Kirk Cousins. And so, yeah, nice little group of weapons here. And I think really, again, like we were talking about just a few weeks ago when we were talking about Kirk Cousins, stock up Drake London and stock up Kyle Pitts. I think that, relying on them to absolutely get it done was obviously going to be pretty widespread as far as the assumptions. But now they bring in some extra weapons, and it's not like they have to throw the ball every single time. Two guys, obviously, Rondell Moore hasn't been amazing. Didn't really have that good of a year last year in Arizona, but I like it. I like that what they're doing here. I think that they've got a deep threat. They got a physical receiver, and Rondell Moore who can get open over the middle of the field, and then Kyle Pitts. So it's a nice little core. They got a nice little versatility as far as what each receiver can do. So as far as Kirk Cousins' value, I like it right now because he does got himself a nice little group of weapons. As far as Drake London goes, stock up. Kyle Pitts, stock up. Bijan Robinson, stock up. Just really all those guys stock, I'd say, especially when with a proven quarterback like Kirk.
Yeah, again, another guy that was really talented in Arizona, but just it didn't come to fruition in a lot of instances, and maybe that's the offense. Just things didn't go their way. A guy like Rondell Moore, more short possession, but a speedy kind of player. It's perfect. Just another type of guy in this offense. That's the big thing about this. All guys that can do all different kinds of things. So. They know they're going to have their roles, and it's going to really help Atlanta in the end.
All right, Zach, let's jump to one of the big signings in the New York metropolitan area. Mike Williams signs with the New York Jets a one-year, $10 million deal. $8 million of it totally guaranteed. The rest coming in incentives. Zach, first off, how about Joe Douglas getting some talent around Garrett Wilson? Applause. And as a fellow Garrett Wilson owner, I'm sure that you can say that you were thrilled that it's not just him there on an island by himself.
Yeah, no more double teams. Probably going to get some double teams, but I think less double teams because of Mike Williams being there. So that's huge. I agree. I think that's big time. And of course, we're still like they still have Alan Lazard. They still have like other guys that Rodgers had as go-to weapons in Green Bay. And because of that, that's going to even make defenders move even more away from Garrett Wilson. So a big time move there. And I think for Williams, he's one of those guys that it's been the last couple of years kind of just hit or miss. All right, you're going to have a 50-point game or you're going to have a 0. It's just one of those. He's that kind of player. It's kind of boom or bust, but I think he's huge in this Jets offense because I think they could go to him more because he's wide receiver 2. He clearly is wide receiver 2 rather than there were a couple guys here and there in LA, and I think now it kind of helps Mike Williams' fantasy value to be with a guy like Rodgers who can. Get him the ball in all kinds of situations.
And now, more so from an NFL standpoint, like we're very unsure of what the Jets are actually going to do here at the draft in just a month. And that's the most surprising part to me is that they filled all their needs pretty quickly. They built up their offensive line, which seemed to be the real pressure point for them. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers coming back, and so he's ready to go. They go out, they get Tyron Smith. They go out, they get Morgan Moses. They go out, they get John Simpson. So they shore up the offensive line. They get Mike Williams. And so it's not like they're forced to go out and get a receiver in the draft. They go out and they actually cut CJ Uzama, but their starter, Tyler Conklin, he comes back. And so they don't have to get a tight end. Zach, I mean, really the Jets can go any which way. I could see Brock Bowers landing here. I could see one of the receivers landing here as well. If a receiver does land there, how much does that affect Mike Williams in fantasy?
I mean, it kind of depends where the draft pick comes. Obviously,
let's say with the 10th pick,
that kind of, I would say like Garrett Wilson would be the top, and then it would be kind of even between Mike Williams and the other guy, and then obviously the ability for the young player to start booming and moving up. I think that kind of deal could hurt Mike Williams. I think Right now, yeah, he's in a good spot. I think, yeah, it would hurt him just a little bit because the focus could be on developing that young player rather than, oh, let's get the ball to Mike Williams. I think they'll still get it to him. It'll just come a little bit less with a big weapon there in Garrett Wilson and then a young weapon, whoever that is.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the only way that it could just absolutely kill Mike Williams' value is if they end up trading up like all these mock drafts have said in this last week and going and getting Marvin Harrison Jr. Otherwise, I think that, yeah, I agree. If they get a receiver and then Mike Williams probably sticks right around the same and it's a wide receiver 2A and 2B sort of a thing. So, yeah, that would hurt his value, obviously, from a fantasy perspective. If they do go out and get a lineman, obviously Mike Williams' value then goes up because he's number 2 receiver, and there's really no competition. He has Alan Lazard behind him, Xavier Gibson behind him as well. If they go ahead and they get Brock Bowers, I think that's a little interesting too. With Bowers and with Conklin, maybe you see a little bit more that they're playing that 12 formation that we saw quite a bit, where they have 2 tight ends on the field at the same time. Not really sure how it'll affect Mike Williams, but obviously conversation for another day. That said, them signing Mike Williams, really big for Garrett Wilson, I think, more than anything. And obviously big for Aaron Rodgers because he's coming off of a season where he tore his Achilles. He's not going to have a lot of time. And, yeah, their line's great, but he's not going to have that mobility to move around, I don't think, at least, because he's coming off a torn Achilles. So, we'll see. We've seen the videos of him moving around the pocket. I'll believe it when there's a 300-pound rush coming at him about how fast he can move. But, yeah, these guys are getting open quick. Garrett Wilson, Mike Williams, those guys who could get open quick. So I think it's a real positive.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so our next signing here, Hollywood Brown. He says farewell to Arizona. He goes to Kansas City. Zach, they have a guy that they can rely on, I think, other than Rashee Rice. That, to me, is really what it comes down to. And they had a guy who can come out, who can come right in and slot in right as the 1B, I would say, to Rashee Rice. I would still say that Rashee Rice right now is the 1A. We'll see what happens when training camp opens up. But, yeah, I really like the signing.
Yeah, you know who's very happy? This guy, because I have both Rashee Rice and Hollywood Brown. So, I mean, yes, they could eat into each other's touches, but they got Patrick Mahomes as their quarterback. So, I mean, they could do anything. I think Hollywood Brown is a really, really great player who he went to Baltimore. It was kind of on and off because of just how that offense rolls. And then Arizona, it was really, really good when he was healthy and he was the number 1. I remember Hopkins was out the first 6 games a couple of years ago, and Hollywood Brown looked like he was the number 1 wide receiver in all of fantasy. I think he had a 40-point game. He had a 30-point. He was going crazy because he was just given an opportunity. The talent is definitely there. I think now pairing up with a guy like Rashee Rice, it opens things up for both of them. Obviously, Travis Kelce's still there, and he's going to get his touches. But the wide receiver room is something that Kansas City was kind of on and off on. They had their number 1, and then they kind of relied on everybody else. I think this is a 1A, 1B type of situation at wide receiver. And I think that really helps Kansas City's offense because it puts less pressure on that specific number 1 to really get a lot of touches. And I mean, they're going to get them touches. Mahomes has no problem, even with tight coverages, getting his guys the ball. So I think from that standpoint, it's a huge move for Kansas City.
And I think it's a huge move for Patrick Mahomes. He took a step back last year, even though they won the Super Bowl and it was all great in the fantasy world. Like, it was a struggle for a lot of weeks. As somebody who went out and made a big trade for Patrick Mahomes, I was very underwhelmed by the return, at least for this year. Obviously, he's still Patrick Mahomes, and so he is still going to be a guy that's picked as one of the first couple quarterbacks, if not the first quarterback, especially in dynasty leagues. He should first guy off the board. That said, I like this move for them. I like this move for him. Again, I think that this is going to be, like you just said, 1A, 1B. I just like it. I think it's going to be a good, solid move. He'll stick around for a couple of years. I don't think this is going to be it for him. He did sign a 1-year, $7 million deal, but I think that that'll end up turning into, a couple more years after that.
Yeah, 100%.
All right, so the next guy here is Gabe Davis, who joins the Jacksonville Jaguars, leaving the Buffalo Bills. 3 years, $39 million, 24 of it guaranteed at signing. Zach, listen, first off, Dave, shout out to him, who just basically took the money and ran because the Buffalo Bills were in cap hell and could not afford that. But I think that Gabe Davis sort of works himself into a role here. Obviously, Calvin Ridley left, and so he sort of fits himself into a nice role where he has the opportunity to become the number one receiver here over Christian Kirk. I think that at the get-go, it's going to be sort of even. As far as what it was last year, it was kind of that. I think that the same sort of is true here. And obviously, kind of fight to see who the number one receiver is. Gabe Davis has never been a number one receiver in the NFL. And he's had a game he sort of has been in and out and hot and cold every week from fantasy. And so, yeah, here it's really just an opportunity for him, for Gabe Davis owners especially, who are frustrated with the highs and the lows, to actually have a nice steady dose of points here each week.
Yeah, I think looking at this offense is kind of it just looks different, so it's a little bit weird to me. But I think the biggest winners from this kind of deal for Gabe Davis is Travis Etienne and Evan Ingram, because both guys, you can now say, all right, well, they're going to get their roles every single game. They're just going to get their roles, rather than last year where we didn't completely know about it with Ridley coming in. We were like, okay, there's so many high-powered wide receivers now. There's so many weapons now. There are still so many weapons. I think the situation of Kirk, Gabe Davis, and Zay Jones are all just kind of going to feed off each other. I think that's going to be a big thing. I don't think anyone's going to really get to that high level as a clear number one. I think they're going to really get those. They're going to split points, all three of them. I think Zay Jones is one of those guys who will also fit in very well because of the chemistry that he built last year. He looked great at some stages last year in this Jacksonville offense. So I think they're kind of just going to split from each other. And then Ingram and Etienne, you kind of know what you're going to get each week from those guys. I think that's the read I'm getting on this Jacksonville offense right now.
Yeah, I totally agree with you as far as the Ingram thing goes, as far as the Etienne thing goes. Those guys are going to get their roles each week. And so if you're an Evan Ingram owner, you're actually kind of happy with this, that they didn't go out and get like Keenan Allen, for example. This allows them to use them as one of their top targets from the passing game, use one of them as the the top asset as far as the running game goes. So yeah, I like it for those two. Yeah, Gabe Davis, he's not most exciting, but again, opportunity awaken here, and we'll see what happens. Listen, Gabe Davis could very well turn into a number one receiver, and we're having a different conversation in a year about what he actually turned out to be. Listen, I think that also from the standpoint, it's not as good, and we'll talk about how they replaced him in the few minutes here, but I just think that, yeah, losing Davis and they're sort of in this cap hell move, they might have to go replace him in the draft.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so before we get to Curtis Samuel, let's talk about another big trade that happened in the NFL. Deontay Johnson, he goes to the Carolina Panthers, automatically coming in as a number one target now for Bryce Young alongside Adam Thielen. Zach, do you like this move?
I do, because it kind of talks about what we talked about with the Bears a little bit earlier, Brett. And then obviously I wouldn't put Deontay Johnson on the level of a guy like Keenan Allen, who's done it for so many years. But it kind of, okay, you settle Bryce Young in, although it wasn't great, you kind of he found that number one guy in Adam Thielen, and you gave him a couple more weapons that he has around him. And then once it gets to the second year, the third year, then you go and grab a really solid wide receiver, and you keep adding weapons for your young quarterback. That's why I'm a really big fan of it. I think the Bears just jumped in already, and they're like, oh well, Caleb Williams is going to be great with all these guys automatically. Hold on a sec. I think it's going to take a tiny bit of time. Carolina, they're moving on with the developing process. So I think that's very big for them. And you add another weapon in Deontay Johnson, takes the pressure off the number one last year in Thielen, and you now work with both guys. Plus, their work in the running back room. Chuba Hubbard looked like he was ready to go all of a sudden at the end of last year. I think they're moving along in a really good direction. And of course, Jonathan Mingo as well, who's super young, still has a lot of time to go and is also still getting used to the NFL. I think this is a really smart move by Carolina. It just gives your quarterback another really solid weapon. And I think it'll help them out this season.
Yeah, and it's a quarterback who was essentially left out to dry when Adam Thielen didn't get open, and plain and simple. And so, yeah, it gives him another guy to go check out. And I think that as far as Deontay goes, he gets open. He also can catch in traffic. He didn't have that great of a year last year. He was 36th in points per game. I think he has the opportunity to have some of those Adam Thielen type games that Adam Thielen had last year. Adam Thielen finished as wide receiver 25, which puts him right on the brink of like wide receiver 3 in those 12-team leagues. I think that's where you can probably say that Deontay Johnson can get to. I'd say he's a wide receiver 3 at worst, with the opportunity that he gets into your weekly wide receiver mix if you're in 2 wide receiver leagues.
Agreed. And just quickly for Deontay Johnson owners, I think he'll get a little bit more touchdowns now. I think obviously the problems in Pittsburgh, just getting into the end zone. It was the year before was horrendous. He had none. And then last year, I think he only had 1 or 2. A lot of that had to do with injuries. But yeah, I think we can kind of expand on the touchdown value for Deontay Johnson now that he's somewhere else besides Pittsburgh.
Yeah. All right, so we teased a couple minutes ago here, but Curtis Samuel signs with the Buffalo Bills, replacing Gabe Davis. So, Zach, we look at their wide receiver core right now. They got Stephon Diggs, they got Khalil Shakir, and they got Curtis Samuel. Not the most exciting, and I think that, like I said, I think that we might see another receiver come in here via the draft, and I'm not sure where they're going to look to bring him in. And yeah, the rumblings are out there like every offseason about Stephon Diggs. He's not going anywhere. He's going to stick around. This is sort of a transition year, I think, for the Bills a little bit. Yeah, Josh Allen comes back. James Cook comes back as well. Dalton Kincaid took a nice step forward in his rookie year and, looks to be a pretty consistent tight end 1 in your fantasy lineup. But I'm not sure that Diggs, who took a step back, really is good with this move from a fantasy perspective. I think this is going to be a real trouble for him if they can't replace Gabe Davis with anybody significant, just because I think that they're going to throw the double on Diggs pretty much the entire game.
Yeah, and I think that's just a great move by the defense if they do, because obviously it's just putting Buffalo in a tough spot and Josh Allen in a tough spot. They got to get Diggs the ball. Shout out Mac Hollins also going up to Buffalo. So it's just meh. That's kind of how I feel about it right now. Meh. It's a good move for Samuel to go up there. He could get some really solid touches. I think the biggest thing we see is the development and production rise in Dalton Kincaid, Brett. I think that's the biggest thing we see from this season, especially from the pass catchers in Buffalo. Just continuing to help him grow and give him the ball. I think that's a big thing right now for the Bills heading into this season.
After week 10, Stephon Diggs was wide receiver 45. He had the career worst years He's 31. Like we were already talking about heading into this offseason about the cliff and it's coming and all of that. I'm going to say in this season, with the move they just made by taking Chris Samuel, stock up Josh Allen's rushing yards because I think that there's going to be a ton of opportunity for him to rush the ball. Stock up James Cook because I think they're really going to utilize him a ton, especially in the passing game. Like I said, if they throw that double on Diggs, I'm not sure I really trust Shakir and Curtis Samuel to get open as much as I would like. Kincaid, he's an animal. He's going to feast, and so I think, like I said, I think he has the opportunity right now to be a pretty consistent tight end one. But yeah, I think the Bills need to make another move here at wide. Curious to see if they get one of those receivers up there in the draft. Maybe an opportunity where they make a move at the draft, get a guy that we're not even talking about. I don't know that T. Higgins is going to be the guy that gets traded to them, obviously, but they have to do their homework here.
Yeah, 100% agree, bro.
All right, so another trade that went down in the NFL, but in Cleveland. It happened right before free agency opened. Jerry Jeudy, he gets traded to the Browns. Zach, a nice little core here for Amari Cooper and Jerry Jeudy and Elijah Moore, with Cedric Tillman sitting right behind them, David Bell as well. Two dynasty guys that really aren't going to get their opportunity. I'm not sure that those two guys are going to make much of an impact. And dynasty community has been kind of looking at those guys over the last year and saying, hey, throw them the ball. I don't know that that's going to come. Deshaun Watson was not good last year. They do go out and they sign Jameis Winston to be the backup. And so curious to see if it all goes to hell, if Jameis actually comes in and plays a couple games here at quarterback. Obviously, Deshaun Watson also has been battling with the injury concerns. And so we'll see. David Njoku, I think he'll be okay. I don't know that this move affects him at all. He's still going to be David Njoku. But I don't love it. I just don't. I think there's too many mouths to feed. It's sort of what we were talking about with Caleb Williams. I think there's a lot of mouths to feed. Amari Cooper, I think his value goes down a touch. I'm not sure it's going to go down a huge chunk, but I think it goes down a touch just because there's a ton of guys that are going to have to get the ball here.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things going on in this offense. A lot of things. So I think looking at it, I think Chubb's going to get his work. I think obviously coming back from the injury, I think looking at it, Cooper is going to be the lead wide receiver, and obviously Jerry Jeudy is going to be number 2. But talking about it with Elijah Moore said, all right, I'm going to take a step up maybe too. So I think looking at it, the best thing you could say from this is, Njoku is going to get his touches. So I think that's going to be a big thing for this offense. I like the trade because I think Jerry Jeudy needed a change of scenery and needed to get out of Denver. Obviously, he had the whole thing last year with Steve Smith, and I think it's a new situation. A new quarterback can get him to a level that he wants to get. He's still very young, so I think he still has a lot of time to prove himself. I like it for now, but also there's a lot of weapons to feed. So I think that's something that worries me just a tiny bit.
Jump right to our next one here. KJ Osborne. He ends up going to the New England Patriots. Listen, I think this was more of a minor signing, but at the same time, I think that it's a kind of big signing for the New England Patriots because it was just Pop Douglas last year. Really didn't do much, and obviously he had Mac Jones at quarterback. That ended up getting nixed and Mac Jones sent out of town. Not sure if they're going to get a quarterback here. I just, I keep seeing all of these things that they might go another position. And the more that I see it, the more that I'm actually sort of buying the dip here as far as keeping Jacoby Brissett in as their start. I don't know. It's the Patriots are just being weird right now. I thought it was for sure they were going quarterback. And, obviously a ton of smoke screens out there pre-draft. So you can't really buy everything that's going on. But I keep seeing them more than any other team of not getting a quarterback. So not really sure. As far as KJ Osborne's value goes, obviously that changes if Omar Harrison Jr., because then he's essentially the third receiver there. But for right now, I think he's sort of neck and neck with Kendrick Bourne for that number 2 receiver. Zach, what are your thoughts on this?
Nah, I think it's just another weapon. All right, yeah, throw them into the mix of New England wide receivers who they usually have the number 1, and then they focus on just everybody else. It's kind of a Kansas City approach to it, but I think it's just I don't know how to feel about it. I think it's kind of a fantasy killer for a guy like KJ Osborne, because I just don't know how much he's going to get the ball by going to New England. I think they kind of work on their offense in terms of the running game and kind of go from there. So looking at it, it's just a meh move. So I'm like, all right, it's good for now and see where it goes. But I think for fantasy value, it's just a killer, Brett.
Yeah, listen, the owner in our league, we play a league where we have two running backs, 3 wide receivers, and then 2 flexes. And so you have the opportunity that if you really want to, you can play 5 wide receivers there in the lineup. KJ Osborne last year was obviously on the Minnesota Vikings, Kirk Cousins offense, alongside Jordan Addison, alongside Justin Jefferson. Our owner in our league used to play that guy in the flex. Used to play KJ Osborne in his flex, so he didn't make his first 3 receivers. Ended up being somewhere in that next 2 rankings as far as it goes. And it's sort of going to end up, I think, a lot of the time about the same. And then there'll be some games where he ends up just on his bench outright, because I don't know. Obviously, it depends who's playing quarterback. That's first and foremost. Who's playing quarterback in the New England Patriots? If it's Jaden Daniels, then we might be having a different conversation. But even with the Jaden Daniels, I'm not sure how high the ceiling is. I'm just not. And so, he's probably going to end up in that flex role. That's why I say that. He's probably would end up in that flex role, but not in the first 3 receivers.
Yeah, 100% agree.
All right, so jumping to our next guy here, Isaiah McKenzie. He joins the New Jersey Giants. I almost called them the New York Giants. And, I mean, this really just for me was a signing where it kind of is murky because you're not really sure what the Giants are going to do. Also a team where we're unsure of what they're going to do with the draft. We're unsure about Daniel Jones. We're unsure about, who will be the quarterback for the Giants and whether or not they keep Daniel Jones. They end up moving on to Drew Lock. They end up moving on to another quarterback that they go trade up. I've seen a lot of rumors about J.J. McCarthy potentially coming in. I mean, this has been going on the whole offseason as far as the quarterback position goes with Russell Wilson that happened with, et cetera. So I'm not sure this really does a ton as far as the value goes for Isaiah McKenzie because, like I said earlier, this was a very minor signing. Isaiah McKenzie was a minor player. That said, the Giants sort of really needed receivers. Yeah, if they get a receiver here in the draft, like all bets are off, and Isaiah McKenzie's value is practically none. I just think that there really hasn't been a proven guy. They have Wan'Dale Robinson. They have Darius Slayton. They have Jalen Hyatt. But none of them really proved themselves to be the number one and even just a fantasy asset that could be started each and every week. And so, for me, this was Zach, what do you
Another one. Yeah. All right. I think for fantasy just means not a lot because the Giants are a team where they have that top guy. They're going to ride with their top weapon. When they don't, it's just a mix of everybody. And let's see who booms. Let's see who's great each week. That's the kind of system that they're in. So that helps a running back and that helps a tight end. Definitely does not help a wide receiver. So I think it's that kind of situation. I do think the chemistry between Daniel Jones and Darren Waller will take a nice step this year. Obviously, things were a little off. Jones had injuries and things just weren't great in the system. So I think looking at it, they could take a nice step up this year. But as far as wide receiver goes, meh, one of those.
All right, so jumping over to the tight end position as we break down some of these guys here. Dalton Schultz, he re-signs with the Texans on a 3-year deal. So I think last year we saw Dalton Schultz kind of have a role, and it was sort of like what he had when he was in Dallas with Dak Prescott, where he was that safety valve. CJ used him a ton as the safety valve. He ends up finishing just outside the top 12. I think that's sort of where his fantasy value was by the end of last year. He was sort of that streaming option, very, very low end tight end one. I think that that's sort of the same here. I don't know that the Texans really did anything that changes his value completely. What are your thoughts here?
I agree. I mean, yes, they got Joe Mixon. That was their big signing for this offseason, but I think he just fills into the role that Singletary had. And it doesn't really change anything in terms of the passing game and these weapons. I don't think it changes much. And I mean, he had a great year. He had a really, really good year for Houston last year, and at 27 years old, it's good prime of his career. And I think he can definitely expand on what he was able to do last year with Stroud at quarterback. Obviously, one of Stroud's favorite weapons, and kept going to him in big situations. As a team that loves to throw the ball, we saw that last year, and I think that's huge for a guy like Dalton Schultz to be back down in Houston.
So jumping to our next storyline here, a pair of tight ends head to New England. And we just talked about KJ Osborne coming in. Hunter Henry coming in, as well as Austin Hooper. We'll just kind of talk about briefly about each one of them. Let's start with Hunter Henry, though. He comes back. Was kind of a borderline tight end 2, I would even say. You really saw him a lot in those tight end premium leagues where you kind of get points for each catch that the tight end makes. I think it's sort of the same here. It also really depends on who is playing quarterback. And just like we said with KJ Osborne, where they go in the draft. Is it Jacoby Brissett? Do they use the pick on a quarterback? And is that quarterback going to play right away? Or is he going to sit behind Jacoby Brissett? I think that's really what it comes down to. However, I don't know that Hunter Henry's going to return himself to this fantasy relevance and have some Renaissance tour where he becomes this tight end 1 candidate. Like I think that ship has sort of sailed for him. As far as Austin Hooper goes, I think it's the same thing. There's that minor, Jonnu Smith deal that they signed a couple of years ago. I think that's sort of what I see here. Jonnu Smith was pretty good as far as his value went, and then he went to New England, and it sort of just was like, okay, Jonnu Smith's there, and everybody was really hyped about it, and then he just really didn't do anything. That's where I see Austin Hooper's value going. So, staying away from him. Zach, what do you think about both of these guys?
Yeah, New England and their 2 tight end sets. They're obsessed. So just back to normal for them. 2 talented tight ends here. I think the big thing though is, I think the fantasy value is just absolutely trounced for both of these guys, because I think they're just going to eat into each other, number one. And number 2, we don't know who the quarterback is. So it's a new quarterback, and it's going to take time to really get going. For this year, I'm not really a fan of either. I think they're maybe one you're hold on your bench. I would probably say Henry over Hooper from that standpoint. But even so, I'm really not excited about this tight end room because, like I said, I think they're just going to eat into each other.
The tight end who went elsewhere and now sort of forms a bit of a committee was Gerald Everett. He goes to Chicago. Zach, it's a 2-year, $12 million contract worth up to $14 million, $6 million of it guaranteed. He's going to join Cole Kmet at a position, and it looks like they're going to play a lot of 12 formation the same way. And so you got Keenan Allen, you got DJ Moore out there, and then you got 2 tight ends out there, Cole Kmet and Gerald Everett. I think that's what we're going to see a lot as far as the formations go. Gerald Everett, listen, he was always that like boomer bust, like tight end desperation play. And if he scored a touchdown, then you had a good week. And if he didn't, then, it wasn't a good week. I think it's sort of be the same thing here. I'm not starting him in my lineup. Yes, he's a nice bench stash in case he overtakes Cole Kmet as the season goes on. But yeah, I think that the days of Gerald Everett being a consistent fantasy producer are gone, long gone.
Yeah, I agree. This one did not make a lot of sense to me, Brett. It really didn't. I think Chicago, you have a guy in Cole Kmet who's been pretty good. He's been really good since he came in. Yeah, he had 1 year where it was off. But then last year he looked great. I think the year before that he had flashes that he looked pretty good. And then now you just give him competition with a guy who was a tight end one in the last place he went down in LA and Everett. I think Everett's value is kind of cratered now because he's got Kmet in front of him. I don't think he's really ever going to take over, get head in front of Cole Kmet. But I think this one's just weird. I don't have too much on it because I was just so confused why they would give competition to a guy like Cole Kmet, who's been just solid enough so far. And now, even with the quarterback coming in, I think they'll be in a good spot. So Everett's value's gone, and Kmet's value can go down just a touch because now he has competition. That's kind of the situation they're in.
Yeah, a guy who doesn't really have any competition comes to Cincinnati. It was Mike Gesicki. He ends up going to the Bengals. He seems like he's going to be the number one tight end option. Zach, do we see some sort of renaissance and revelations of Mike Gesicki from years past, or is this really just a depth sign here? And yeah, he's going to be the number one pass catcher, but he's not going to get the ball that much.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but Tanner Hudson would like to have a word about that.
Yeah,
I think they like him and maybe try and still give him a bit of a role. It's weird in Cincinnati because it obviously tight end has just never been the go-to for them. I think they had Hayden Hurst for a little while, and he got some good points. Other than that, they had Irv Smith last year. He got hurt. They had Tanner Hudson, who kind of stepped into a role. I think this offense is all about those wide receivers and nothing else. And I think, yeah, Gesicki could. I would say if there was a number one, it would be Gesicki. But even so, I don't know how high the value can really go. I actually like a guy like Gesicki who can be a red zone threat and get touchdowns. I think I like it from that standpoint because I think he's an expert in those kind of situations in the red zone. But other than that, I'm not a huge fan of it. If he doesn't get into the end zone, I think it's just a dud week. So that's kind of where I'm at on this situation.
I'm not sure how I feel about it because, listen, Tanner Hudson is okay. Like he is. Drew Sample, they obviously want to use him as the blocking tight end. Yeah, like I said, this is just it's a weird one because there was not really any impact tight end, like you said earlier, since the days of Andy Dalton, where they had CJ Uzomah. And that was sort of his go-to, and you knew that CJ Uzomah was going to get the ball and get volume. Like that, I don't see that here. The receivers are going to get the ball. Still curious to see what happens with the T. Higgins situation, and if he gets traded, then yeah, okay, we can have a conversation then. I don't know that T. Higgins is going anywhere. I think he's going to stay around. But yeah, I'm not sure about the value here. Is it worth a flyer if you have off-season waivers? Yes. Go outside Mike Gesicki. Stash him at the very end of your very long bench. But that's it. That's the only way that I see Mike Gesicki having any sort of relevance is if T. Higgins gets traded out of town.
Yeah, fair. It's very touchdown dependent in my mind.
Yeah. All right, so let's just quickly break down some of the guys that haven't signed and whether or not they might have an impact elsewhere, and where they might have an impact. So we got Hunter Renfrow, Allen Robinson, Odell Beckham Jr., Michael Gallup, Tyler Boyd, Michael Thomas, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, and Kendrick Bourne, among others. Zach, anybody on here that I just said that has any sort of relevance to you?
I think I heard Tyler Boyd. I think
Mm-hmm.
I think Tyler Boyd's a name to watch out for, because even if it's not huge for fantasy, I think just a really solid weapon who, if he sinks into an offense, he can then grab fantasy value. Just because of what he's able to do on the field. He's a really talented wide receiver, and obviously the last couple of years have just been all right. He's got T. Higgins and Jamar Chase in front of him, but what if he doesn't? That's a kind of question mark I have. Not really other names. I know some people say, "Oh, where's Odell gonna go?" I think the Odell prime days are long, long gone, and wherever he goes, he'll maybe get a couple touches here and there, and we'll call it a day. I don't think really that some of those guys, I just don't see them really booming wherever they go.
Yeah, it's fair. I think that, to have an Odell, yes, there are some spots where he'll do better than others. But a lot of what we've been seeing is like, these bigger teams that already have sort of established wide receivers. Like I saw Miami. Like Miami's not going to be able to get Odell the ball to a number one receiver level, plain and simple. It's not going to happen. Yeah, if he goes back to the Giants, like, okay, that'll be cool and it'll be fun for a story. I don't know how much relevance he'll have because we don't really know who's playing quarterback for them. You could go down the list of all these teams that have been, rumored around the potential of signing Odell. I don't know that he's going to have a big impact. Tyler Boyd, I think, has the opportunity to go sign with a place and be a valuable dynasty asset. I really honestly thought he was going to end up on the New York Jets. I didn't think Mike Williams was going to end up there. That would have been a great spot for him. He would have been the number 2 guy, would have been able to get open over the middle, sort of what they envisioned for the Allen Lazard spot last year. And then you can go out and get another receiver in the draft. Now that they get Mike Williams instead, like I said, I don't know that they're going to go out and get another receiver unless it's a guy in the draft. So I don't see Tyler Boyd signing with a team like them. But yeah, I think that there's some opportunities that are out there for him. Pittsburgh is a team that kind of comes to mind to me. That might be an interesting opportunity for him. Obviously, they have George Pickens there, but very minimal outside of that. They got Quez Watkins, they got Van Jefferson, Calvin Austin, Pat Freiermuth, and that's their pass catching options. I think there might be an opportunity for him to sign there, and that would be an actual impact as far as his fantasy value goes. Michael Thomas is the roller coaster ride of the last year. The last 5 years, really, if you're talking about just his entire career. But just as far as the fantasy value goes, it was down and then it went up because he stayed healthy, and then it went back down because he got hurt. And now it's sort of at a point where you could debate actually just out dropping him. Flipping him for a late round pick swap. Like that's sort of where his value is right now. And it's kind of interesting that, just a few weeks ago or just a few months ago, I should say, because now we're in March, just a few months ago, like there were some weeks it was like, okay, Michael Thomas is actually a valuable fantasy asset. Flip him now before he gets hurt. Flip him now. And a lot of people did flip him and cashed in on it. Pretty good move for them because I think that Michael Thomas's value is not going to get anywhere close. Even it doesn't really matter what team he ends up signing for. Sneaky little signing that I think could potentially turn into more. Hunter Renfrow. I think Hunter Renfrow had a nice little role, and it disappeared. It just disappeared when Devontae Adams came in. He was still a receiver, and so to me, I think that there's an opportunity where he can land with the right team and actually have a valuable role. Jacoby Myers seemed to take the targets from him in Las Vegas. Obviously, Devontae, but I think that there's a nice little chance here that if Hunter Renfrow signs in the right spot, we could be talking about him in just a few months as far as potential sleeper candidates.
Oh yeah, I love me some prime Hunter Renfrow fantasy days. I was all over him. I drafted him a couple of years, and I was all in. And then obviously it came down once Devontae came in. They got Jacoby Myers as well last year, and I feel like his relationship just with the coaching staff and everything in Vegas, it all kind of went downhill. And he's a guy that definitely needed to get out of there. But the talent definitely still there because he's the small, speedy possession type wide receiver. And I mean, in the NFL, you see a lot of those guys, and they work pretty well in their offenses. So, as a possession guy and just moving the ball downfield, I agree with you. I think Hunter Renfrow can really have an impact somewhere, whether they need that small, speedy possession guy. I think he's one of the best to do it in the NFL. He had those really, really good years in Vegas, and I think now looking at that, it's a question of where he goes, and a lot of questions on where any of these guys are going to go, because it's kind of we're at a spot now where a lot of guys have signed, but there's also teams that you see they're very top heavy, and then maybe some room at the bottom. But I don't know if those guys want to sign there. That's some of the guys that we just said. So that's interesting. Obviously, teams are also planning for the draft. So it's a kind of a weird period for these players. I'm interested to see where a lot of these guys land, and if it's in a solid role or just one of those backups that are sitting on the bench.
Yeah, and I think that we also are in a spot where, the draft is coming up. And so you're going to say, okay, do we want to take this guy in that's a veteran, or are we going to just draft somebody, and who's better? If we draft this, is he better than Hunter Renfrow? Is he better than Michael Thomas? That's sort of what we're going to be seeing in these next couple of weeks in the boardrooms. We won't be in them, but those conversations will be occurring. And so, some of these guys probably won't sign until after the draft. We might not see these guys, a few of them, sign until August when training camps open and they actually start to figure out, okay, well, what do our position groups look like? Guy goes down with an injury and quickly they have to pivot and grab another guy. We might see some of these guys sign right around then as a late addition. But I love me some Hunter Renfrow, like you said. I just think that the talent is there. Potential landing spot. Like, listen, if he went to, let's say, I'm just going to throw it out there. I don't know that this is a fact of anything, but if you put him in there in Kansas City and he's getting open over the middle, doesn't that make that team a better team? Like, I think that would be a sneaky little ad there for them. Just saying, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, Andy Reid, if you want to go out and get one of those kind of guys. Might be a nice little veteran to add to a pretty young group. Obviously they had McCole Hardman last year, and we don't even have to get into a conversation about McCole Hardman and his off-field stuff, but especially with the New York Jets. But as far as the young guys go, like, it's a very young group. It could be good to have a veteran there and Hunter Renfrow, a guy who can get open.
Yeah, and another team that you mentioned that kind of needs a wide receiver is Pittsburgh. I mean, something like that where he can maybe be a number 2, maybe just be a number 3 and be the slot guy and work off of George Pickens and everything in that offense. Obviously, they got a new quarterback now in Russell Wilson, who, I mean, he'll throw the ball short. He's fine with throwing the ball short. It's not always going to have to be deep. So a lot of situations that there could be opportunity there, but I don't know if these teams are budging before the draft comes in, bro.
Yeah, I doubt it. I just think that, a lot of these guys they're gonna want their rookies signed on multi-year deals and at very, very low money. Sometimes it makes more sense to get them locked in across the years rather than a 1-year deal, even if it's at minimal money. Just the multi-years, I think, really is what it comes down to. I think there's a role for some of these guys, at least, to come in. Really not going to touch on any of the tight end targets still out there, because I just think that other than the potential of CJ Uzama having some sort of resurrection. There's really not a lot out there. Logan Thomas, Robert Tonyan, Mercedes Lewis, etc. Like I don't know that there's any sort of fantasy relevance, so I don't know that there's much to even talk about.
Yeah, definitely fair, Brett.
All right, so next week we will start jumping into our NFL draft previews. We're going to start with the quarterback position. Zach, this is a pretty interesting year for the quarterback position. We talked about Caleb Williams and what his impact with the Chicago Bears will be. We'll get into that a little bit more on the next episode, and some of these other guys and where they potentially could land, what their style is, and what their fantasy impact might be, and where should they actually get drafted in Dynasty. Zach, any quarterbacks, just to give a little preview, that kind of you have your eye on out there?
I think there's a fair amount of quarterbacks, some that I'm high on, some that I think are being very overvalued right now. So that's something I'm looking at. But I think, the top two, you can't go wrong with them. And no, it's not Drake May. It's Jaden Daniels and Caleb Williams. I think those two guys are pretty slam dunk quarterbacks that can work well in a lot of systems. Obviously, Jaden Daniels, the Heisman winner. Caleb Williams, going to be most likely the number 1 overall pick. So some interesting situations. But Brett, I think we might have some busts on our hands that I might want to talk about next week.
Yeah, quite a bit. I think that this is going to be one of those years that's different than how last year was, where you knew that the quarterbacks up top were going to be good quarterbacks. And yeah, they didn't have a great fantasy value. But yeah, I think that this is going to be one of those proven, because they're sort of unknown years. And it's going to be like, some mid-tier quarterbacks. I don't know that there's going to be any quarterback that's going to be some on great. And, we can clip this and maybe in 10 years, we can say, hey, this dude's an all-time great. And you just said that none of them will be. Yeah, I don't know. I'm a little iffy on the quarterback position this year. Some depth options that could potentially end up coming in later on. Bo Nix, obviously a guy who got a lot of seasoning in college, and he's not being talked about at that top part. So, we'll break him down. We'll break down McCarthy, Daniels, Williams, Drake May, obviously. Drake May is getting a lot of heat right now. Just briefly, he's getting a lot of heat because he's not being talked about the same way that the other three are. Curious if he falls into that CJ Stroud formula where he gets a lot of heat around the rookie draft, and from a dynasty perspective, everybody kind of turns the other way and says, no, we don't want him. He's the 4th guy, and then all of a sudden he ends up being the best guy out of any of them in his rookie year. Curious to see what happens there.
Yeah, pressure's on him. So step up, Drake May. What do you got?
Yeah. So we'll break that down, and we're going to get into the next couple positions in the coming episodes after that, leading all up to the NFL draft, and we'll break down, obviously, afterwards, a lot of the landing spots and what some of these offenses look like. And then Zach's going to be right into OTAs and right back into the swing of things with draft season. So it's all coming quick here on the Third Round Reversal Fantasy Podcast. Please subscribe to us on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. Give us a thumbs up. And in the words of Aaron Rodgers, the night is darkest before the dawn, and we shall rise yet again. For Zach Malvin, I'm Brett Malvin, signing off. We will catch you next episode on the Third Round Reversal Fantasy Football Podcast.